All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to come up with another way that we can solve for a quadratic function. So the idea here is that yesterday you went over how to solve these using factoring. All right, so today we're going to use factoring as a small component of this, but ultimately we're going to learn a new skill called completing the square. All right, so we're going to start in this micro lecture by just looking at a skill that's going to help us actually complete the square. And then once we complete the square, you're going to see how we're going to use factoring ultimately to solve a quadratic. All right, so if you look at this slide here, we are going to ultimately add b over 2 squared in order to complete the square. So that's the whole point of completing the square. So yesterday we mentioned standard form, which was ax squared plus bx plus c. So we're always going to look at the number in front of that x, our b value, to divide that by 2, square it, and that is how we're going to complete the square. So a few examples here. So we'll start with this one. First, I want to know what is b. Now again, b is always the number that is in front of the x to the first power. In this case, b is negative 14. All right, so make sure you bring that sign with it, negative 14. So in order to complete the square, I need to take that b and put it over 2 and then ultimately square it. So that's going to be negative 14 divided by 2 and then ultimately square it. All right, so go ahead, quickly think. Negative 14 divided by 2, that's negative 7. And then anytime you square something, even if it's negative, it's going to be positive. So my number here that I'm going to add to complete the square is going to be 49. So plus 49. So that's what is replacing that box. So that is how I complete the square. Now, that's only the first step. So I've just complete the square. Now what I need to do is they want me to write it as a binomial squared. So yesterday, when we factored, I wanted you guys to look at what are factors of this one here, so that's the c value, that add to our b value. So what are factors of 49 that add to negative 14? Well, in this case, they're both going to be the same number. It's going to be negative 7. All right? And what we're going to do today, and this is how it's going to always work out if you add b over 2 squared, we're not going to leave it like that. We're going to write x minus 7 squared. So those really are the two things I'm looking for. So I'm looking for completing the square and then writing it as a binomial squared. All right, that's the skill you need in order to solve using this way. Okay, so that's the first example. So take a look, think about it, and we're going to try another one here in a second. Okay, let's go to example 2. In this case, my b value is 4. All right, so I'm going to do b over 2 squared. So that's going to be 4 over 2 squared. All right, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides here. Or in this case, I only have one side. So I'm going to just add 4 where that box was. All right, so that is completing the square. I've just complete the square for this quadratic. Now again, I want to ultimately factor. So as you start to do more of these, you're going to start to see a pattern here. How you write this as a binomial squared is you always go back and look at this b over 2. So remember when we did b over 2, it was 4 over 2. Then ultimately I squared it. But if you just pause and just look at b over 2, that's 4 over 2, and 4 over 2 is 2. So that is how you can write the binomial squared. All right? So that is a skill you're going to need in order to complete the square. So adding b over 2 squared and then factoring. All right, so now all of this is well and good, but it doesn't actually help us solve the quadratic. So now I'm going to show you how we're going to use this way to solve a quadratic, to find what x is equal to. All right, so I have this slide here with all these steps. So you can go ahead and take a minute, just read these steps. We're going to go through it slowly. All right, and then after the video is over, you're going to try them at your boards. Again, this is the first time you've ever done this, all right? So it's okay if you're struggling, all right? Just keep trying, and eventually you'll start to get better at it, okay? Now, there's a couple of things I want to point out. You already know this step 3. We just talked about completing the square, and step 4, factoring it. So you've already done steps 3 and 4. So we need to show you step 5 and 6, all right? So that's going to be something new. And then steps 1 and 2, obviously before anything, so that way we can make sure we do this correctly. Now, if you look at step 2, you must have the coefficient of x squared must be 1. All right, so I'll repeat that. At the very beginning of your quadratic, if it doesn't just say x squared, then you cannot complete the square. Now, today, for our purposes, I've made all of the at your board problems having a 1 in front of x squared. So you don't need to worry about that step. But just keep in mind that if it wasn't 1, then you would have to divide every single term by that number to make it 1. All right, so just keep that in mind for step 2. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you all these steps using this example 3. All right, so the first step that you want to do is ultimately, in order to solve this, right, I'm trying to find what values for x will make this 0. I'm going to move my constant, which is negative 15, to the other side. So I'm going to move that to the other side. So it's equal to 15. If it's a negative 15 on the left, when I move it to the right, it becomes a positive. All right, now if you notice how I wrote this, I left space on the left side. I have left space so that I can complete the square. So right here is where I'm going to write plus b over 2 squared. That's going to be some number. All right, it's going to be some number. But whatever I do to one side of the equation, I must also do to the other. So I need to also write plus b over 2 squared on the other side of the equation. All right, that way I keep my equality balanced. All right, so I'm going to write x squared plus 6x. And then now I'm going to substitute in the number that is b. And that b value is that 6. So I'm going to write 6 over 2 squared. Again, on both sides. All right, so we can go ahead and do some math here. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So ultimately, I'm going to add 9 to both sides. All right, so I've completed the square. Now again, this is just steps 1, 2, and 3. In order to get to that step 4, which you have already done, we've already talked about this, I need to factor the left side. So this will always factor to a binomial squared. Always. Guaranteed if you complete the square. All right? Again, as I was trying to point out on the last example, whatever you have as your b over 2, if you ignore the squaring, that is the number that's going to be in this binomial squared. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. So you write x plus 3, all of that squared. All right, so that's the left side. On the right side, we're going to add 15 plus 9 to get 24. Now, at this point, you have used completing the square and set yourself up to ultimately solve for x. Now, this is a process. It's going to take some time. I'm going to do a bunch of steps here at the end. So steps 5 and 6 from that previous slide. I'm going to do all of these steps now, and just bear with me because some of this stuff you've never seen before. And again, you can watch this video over and over again. You're going to practice these a lot, so it'll start to become second nature. But really, really focus now to the steps that I'm going to do. This is kind of one of those checkpoints, right? If you get to this point, I feel good about how you know completing the square. So if you get to that checkpoint, I feel good that you can finish. All right, so that's a checkpoint that I'll be looking for. All right, so now, the whole solving part. I'm going to write this again. Now, when you do this, you don't have to write it again. I'm just trying to show you it's 2 separate steps here. But ultimately, I want to solve for x, not x squared. So I really need to get rid of this square. Well, in order to get rid of something that is squared, you must do the inverse operation of that, which is the square root. Now again, whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I'm taking the square root of both sides. So whenever you take the square root of something squared, those things go away and you're just left with x plus 3. All right, because inverse operations, they go away. Now the right side here is a little tricky. So I'm going to do just a little sidebar over here, all right, before I write it down, just a little sidebar, and ask you to solve x squared equals 9. So if you were to think, what numbers, when I square them, make 9, most students tell me, okay, yeah, 3 works, but there is another one that when you square it makes 9. It is negative 3. So if I am going to take the square root of both sides, just like I did on that other problem, the answer is not just 3, it's a positive 3 and a negative 3. Both of those work. So the way that we show this, all right, and again, this will take some time maybe to process, but the way that we show this is when I write the square root of 24, I also write in front of it a positive and a negative, saying that I have 2 options, all right? Because ultimately, if I were to square that again, I would get 24. All right, so hopefully that makes a little sense. If it doesn't, that's okay. That's where that plus or minus comes from. So we're going to have 2 answers. All right, we're going to have 2 answers. All right, so again, this is another checkpoint. If you get here, then I feel pretty confident about finishing the problem. Now, there's a couple of things to finish. And again, some of this stuff is new, some of it's not. We have actually simplified the square root of 24 in the past. All right, so whenever you have a radical, if you have any perfect squares in there, you should take them out. So if you think about what are the factors of 24, you have 6 times 4, and so that 4 is perfect. So I'm going to write plus or minus 2 times the square root of 6. Again, your calculators can do that for you. Now we're almost done. I have one more step. I must make this say x equals. So if I have a positive 3, I want to move it over, it becomes a negative 3. So this is the answer. Now again, because we have a radical of 6, that's going to give us a decimal. So your answers here, your 2 answers would be negative 3 plus 2 times the square root of 6, or negative 3 minus 2 times the square root of 6. So they're not perfect, nice numbers, but we can leave it like that. So this is what I'm looking for the answer. Again, something brand new, never done this before, so just be patient and work hard with this.